So we have everything set up now. I'm sorry that the setup isn't very spooky. I think I focused on a nice setup rather than a spooky one for these videos, so I'm gonna try to figure out a way to incorporate some spooky aspect into this. I'm terribly afraid of the dark. I will admit that. If I wasn't, I would turn off this light and just leave the other lights above. You can see them in my glasses. Yeah, I would just leave those on. But phobias, we all have them. For a bit of context, I grew up amidst the cornfields of Kansas with my mom, my dad, and my little brother Corey. I was used to the vast fields and the farmland, and not much else. But the highlight of every year was our summer vacation. My mom, dad, brother, and I would load our luggage into the car, head to the airport, and fly to Florida to visit my Uncle Jason. Jason is my dad's youngest brother, and he has always been my most fun and laid-back uncle. We would stay at Uncle Jason's house for 2 weeks every summer since I was 3 years old. That's when he had moved to Florida and bought a big 2-story house with a large pond in the back, where we would go kayaking and fishing. I loved staying with Uncle Jason. I looked forward to the trip every year. I was beyond excited the year I turned 7 years old, because it meant I could go on the canoe and go fishing with my dad and uncle. Uncle Jason insisted that Corey and I had to be 7 years old and have swimming lessons before we could go on the canoe. He also required that we wear a life jacket at all times when we were near the water. This never bothered me because I just wanted to be out there fishing with them. The year I turned 12, my younger brother Corey turned 7. This meant that Mom and Corey could now come along with me, Dad, and Uncle Jason on our first fishing trip. But it also meant that we had to take 2 canoes. In the first canoe were my mom, Dad, and Corey, and in the second canoe, I rode with Uncle Jason. As we had been getting ready to go out on the pond, my mom struggled with Corey in his life jacket. Unlike me, my little brother was not too happy with the life jacket situation. He kept complaining that it was either too tight and that he couldn't breathe, or it was too close and it felt funny. Through all the whining and complaining, my mom kept a good mood, because she was so excited about my brother's first fishing trip. The pond behind Uncle Jason's house was large, and it was big enough that his neighbor's house on the other side looked small compared to it. My dad and Uncle Jason paddled in our canoes about a third of the way across the pond to a fairly deep area that Uncle Jason called the honey hole. He called it that because we always caught a lot of fish in that area. When we got to the spot, everyone was relaxing and the fish were biting, but I felt on edge. I just couldn't relax. It kind of felt like that feeling that you think someone's watching you, but we were smack in the middle of the pond, so that didn't make any sense. My brother was behaving quite well, aside from occasionally complaining about his life jacket. My dad was very focused on fishing, and my mom would tell him over her shoulder that he still had to wear it. But I was just trying to pay attention to fishing and ignore the feeling in my stomach. Everything was very quiet around us, and I began to notice that the fish stopped biting. And then all of a sudden, I heard Corey yell, "Hey, what's that?" followed by a large splash near the canoe. I turned around just in time to see Corey's feet go over the side of the boat. My mom gasped, and my dad dropped his pole in the water and stood up. Thankfully, Corey could swim because he had removed his life jacket while Mom wasn't looking. He had immediately swam back to the boat, and we were trying to pull him in when I heard a low, deep sound, like when a big dog does a kind of warning growl. That's when I noticed the water moving behind my brother, about 15 feet away. At first it looked like a log, but I quickly realized it was an alligator heading straight for Corey. I tried to tell my dad, but when I opened my mouth, no sound would come out. I felt like I was choking, and my skin felt hot and cold all over, like a fever. Fortunately, my mom had looked up, and she saw the gator right after I did. she screamed "gator" over and over as she yanked my brother back onto the boat. I was grateful that my brother was back on the boat, but the alligator was still coming for the canoe. My uncle grabbed one oar of our canoe and started banging it against the side of the canoe to create enough noise to scare it away. By this time, the gator was about 6 feet away from my brother's canoe. My dad had grabbed on an oar and started doing the same. The alligator stopped and looked agitated and began to swim away. At this point, we turned our canoes around and headed toward the shore. When we got back, my dad and uncle sent me, my brother, and my mom back to the house, while my dad and uncle pulled the canoes out of the water. Having vacationed in Florida every year, I knew that there were alligators around and had even seen one from a distance a few times, but I'd never seen anything come that close to our boat, or my family members. I still fish with my dad and Uncle Jason every summer, but I'm always very aware of my surroundings. As for Corey, I don't know if it's because he was so young, but the experience didn't seem to make an impression on him at all. If anyone was wondering, my uncle had told me later that it was a fairly young alligator, and it was only about 4.5 feet long, but still terrifying. This next story is one of my mom's stories from growing up. I changed a couple names for privacy reasons, and yeah, let's get into the second story. For a little background, I grew up in the country, way out in the country. Our closest neighbors were hayfields away. My sister and I were taught to be very careful of wildlife around our area. We were aware that there were many dangerous snakes, coyotes, even bobcats, and hogs around. We used to take walks about a mile away from our home near our neighbor's property. Our mother would usually go with us until we were about 13 years old. One afternoon in the spring, the weather was absolutely beautiful. There were daffodils all along the edges of the fields, the honeysuckle and mimosa trees were in bloom, and everything was fragrant. It was not too hot out, and there was a breeze, so it was the ideal time to go for one of our walks. We walked down our dirt road, past a pond in a field that was across from our house. We would always look for turtles crossing the road near the pond, but we had to watch out for snakes too. This day we didn't see either, so we continued down the road. There was a fork at the end of this road. If we walked straight, we could go through the heavily wooded area that came out by a steep drop-off with a waterfall. If we turned right, we would go between the field and the pond and another smaller hayfield, which had no fence. On this day, we took the right turn. My sister, Hazel, was a very energetic child and loved to run. At the time, she was about 10 years old. As soon as we turned, she ran straight into the small hayfield. She began to cartwheel and jump and run all over the place. I followed behind Hazel, but I stayed closer to my mom. My mom would continue walking on the edge of the field and just turn and come around, back, before we were out of sight. She would repeat this until we tired of playing in the field. My mom had walked for about 3 laps on the side of the field, with me staying 10 feet into the field away from her, when she stopped and looked up from the road to my sister. I still heard my sister singing and jumping around, but my mother's face had completely drained of color. I looked over to my sister to see what the matter was, and at first, I just saw her running and playing. I looked back to my mom and asked her what was wrong. She opened her mouth to speak, and at first, no sound came out. Then, in a hoarse whisper, she said, "Hazel, walk slowly to me." When I looked back up at my sister, I saw a huge hog kicking up its heels and running through the pasture in her direction. Hazel had heard my mother, but she didn't even notice the alarm on her face. Hazel began nonchalantly making her way over to my mom. She hadn't even noticed the hog yet. I was frozen in place. It was terrifying to see my sister, 20 yards away, oblivious to a dangerous animal, heading straight for her. Hazel continued to move in our direction, but the hog kept on its original path. It looked as though the animal didn't even know she was there. When Hazel got to Mom, she hugged her and sighed with relief as the hog continued to frolic into a patch of nearby woods. At this point, we were out of immediate danger, but where there's one hog, there are usually many more, so we thought it best to head home. For those of you who aren't familiar with wild hogs, they can be very, very dangerous. They have large tusks, in which they use for digging grubs out of the ground and fighting off predators. They are also very strong and very fast. An adult hog can kill a person or another animal fairly easily. The hog we saw appeared to be a young, fully grown male. On the day we saw him, he seemed to just be enjoying the day. My sister counts herself very fortunate to not have caught him in an aggressive mood. This last story is a personal story of mine, and I just figured it went along with the theme and I could tell it, so here we go. Personal story number 1. This story takes place at a Pizza Hut that was pretty popular in our town. At the time, I was 4 years old, and my sister Addie was 7, and we were living in a small town with the rest of our family. My mom, sister, and I had all finished eating in the lobby of the restaurant. We paid, and then walked out of the front doors of the establishment. As I mentioned before, I was a toddler at the time that this happened, so naturally, I had been able to walk for a couple years. That being said, apparently my young self decided to take some initiative this night, and I kept up a very proud stride ahead of my mother and sister, clearly disobeying my mom's rule for my sister and I to always walk behind her. I will say that my mom has always been very protective of me and my sister, as a mother should be of her kids. She's always taken every action to ensure our safety and to make sure that all of our needs were met. My sister, being older than me, took after her in this aspect, and has always protected me just the same. This Pizza Hut in particular had a drive-through line that was connected to an ongoing parking lot extension that wrapped around the entirety of the building. In this parking lot extension, our car was parked around the back of the building, opposite from where we were at the front entrance. Because we were walking on the sidewalk and not on the actual drive-through line, my sister decided to join me in walking in front of our mom. We were annoying each other by poking and pushing and playfully hitting one another, as siblings do. This playful behavior continued as we rounded the corner of the back half of the building until our car came into view. Once I saw our car, I didn't miss a beat. Without looking both ways or checking my surroundings, I started a toddler's jog across the drive-through line and toward our car. I heard an engine flare up, as if whoever's it was speeding up. I quickly looked to my right, seeing a big truck barreling toward me with haste, and I froze in my tracks. I couldn't move because I was so afraid of what was potentially to happen to me. I felt the collar of my shirt start to constrict my neck, and I fell down onto the curb behind me. I later found out that this was from my sister grabbing a hold of my shirt and pulling me away from danger. As soon as I hit the ground, I closed my eyes tight, and I didn't open them again until the sound of the truck's engine was out of my hearing range. A new sound filled the air after the incident, my mother's quick and high-pitched voice. I remember her grabbing me up by both of the arms and carrying me to the car. She then sat me down in my seat and asked me if I was all right. I'm sure I replied with unintelligible sobs. She checked me for any sign that I was hurt and found that I was completely unharmed and that the only contender there was for me to be feeling pain was from the impact when I hit the cement. After my mom came to the conclusion that I was all right, she went into a state of shock. My sister and I were buckled up safely inside of our car after Mom helped. She then got into the driver's seat, buckled up, and started following the truck in hopes of getting the make and model and the license plate number. My mom quickly realized that the truck was going too fast now, and, in fear of putting us in danger, she slowed to a stop in a parking lot not too far from us, and she called the police. She informed them of what the truck looked like and the type of truck she figured it could have been, but unfortunately, no license plate. We all knew it at the time that whoever this person was sped up intentionally when they saw me cross the way. I want to thank my mom for handling the situation with her quickness and carefulness. I also want to thank my sister for pulling me out of the way on a knee-jerk reaction. If she hadn't, I most likely would not have been able to tell this story now. And that's true. So this video today I'm gonna take these off, there's a glare. This video was comprised of 3 separate stories. One was from an anonymous watcher, one was one of my mom's stories growing up, and then the last one was a personal story of mine. The common theme with all of these stories is that they all happen to younger siblings. And let me not break my equipment, sorry. I need to get it together. This is my first video where I've had multiple stories. Let me know if you guys like it. If you do, I will start doing videos of 3 stories at a time. And yeah. I also have lots of bloopers from this video. Let me know if I should post those. That's a good idea. I definitely have enough from this video alone, so let me know if you guys want that as well. That's gonna do it for today, and I hope you enjoyed the stories. Bye.